for a creative entity to live, you need to have the business.
Right. So
I'm
now,
going to give you this Simon Sinek's example. So he brought up this interesting thing, like where he says, like, the money is the gas.
Yeah.
You need money, but
Run
that's
the
not
engine,
your
yeah.
destination, right? Like,
Yeah.
you can't go to your destination without gas. Like,
Right.
you need gas for sure. But that's the focus, like where it has to sustain as a business,
right.
for sure, because no free labor, it has to sustain as a business.
My guests today are Justine De Penning and Deepak Jawahar of The Architecture Story. The Architecture Story is an interesting practice that blends art, design, and architecture into one harmonious whole. As they strive to not label themselves as one or the other, I'll stay away from doing so as well. What I can say is that I've had the most interesting conversations with them over the past few years, and they are a perfect fit for this series. Today, we talk about their unusual journeys up to where they met, their approach to their design work, and the importance of technology in the creative process. Just a word about the setting of today's interview. Justine and Deepak went to great effort to set up their installation for the Magnetic Fields Festival just for this interview, and it acts as a unique backdrop to a unique interaction. Big thanks for that, guys. Now, on with the conversation. Welcome to Everything Comes Together. My name is Sreenag and I'm an architectural photographer based in Chennai, India. On this series, I speak with people in the architecture, photography and design communities, documenting their personal journeys, the challenges they overcame, and the most important incidents in their lives that made them who they are today. We came upon the concept now, right, of how you actually start your work by speaking to the people you're going to be doing anything for, your clients. So I'm skipping ahead in the notes because this was something that I wanted to talk to you guys about. When you speak to your clients, right, where do they come from? What do they expect from you? Because one thing I've noticed is it's hard to pin you guys down with what you actually. Everyone likes a label, right? So how do you describe yourselves? Do you call yourselves designers, artists, architects, conceptualizers, creators? Where does that come from? Because your approach seems to be nice and broad and abstract to get the whole view of a situation.
Yeah, so to put it very short description, I would say like more on the installation art. Right. So that's where the heart is, but it's also not to say that that's the only sliver of the zone that we work in. Instead of thinking of the project as like type or scale, we think of it as duration.
Right.
Short duration is something what we are sitting on right now. Medium duration is like something that we did for CPB. It's like a few months, 6 months, something like that. Yeah. Long duration, which is like architectural works, where it's a house for somebody. It's a living space for someone. It's a working space for someone. So that's the way we formulate projects in our head. Instead of saying like, oh, I'm doing a project, a house or a office, we think of it as duration. And that comes with the collaboration between Justine and I, because that's how they formulate in theater. Right. Like,
yeah. So that also comes from the fact that both of you have very different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Right? Yes.
So what's your background like, Justine?
I come from a background in theatre. So I studied theatre performance. I went to an art school, to Cal Arts, and studied in a conservatory. So rather than it being partly physical and you have sort of liberal arts education, it was a conservatory education where all day, every day, you're living and breathing your métier.
Right.
And then, in a sense, your academics are kind of secondary to your practice-based education.
Right.
And I did that for 4 years. And then I went on and did a master's in aesthetics and politics because I was very interested in art history and how that can, having a deep understanding of art history can actually complement an art practice. And that led me to actually work on contemporary Indian art, and I ended up doing my thesis on collective art practices in India from 1947 to 2007, and specifically looking at how artists come together to form a collective, which then transcends the idea of like the singular artist. So the output is a collective output rather than one person's sort of. And I think that I say that because that relates a lot to what we do and what my our practice is as well. Is we really emphasize that it's a collective output rather than one individual. So I think it's something that's kind of always been innately within me, and we carry it forward, and Deepak also.
When you work as a collective, the interesting thing is that we are all products of some method of working. As much as that's what I believe. Like, as much as we say it's talent and but there's certain method to everyone's madness. There's certain so the interesting part of working from different backgrounds as a collective is there are some methods that I take for granted, like this is how it is, this is what it is, and that is vehemently challenged. And there are some things that Justine would take it for granted, saying like, yeah, but this is how it is, this is what we do. And like even draping windows, right? As an architect, we would focus on opening up the windows. And working in theatre, they focus on closing the windows in a different way. And it's kind of like finding the fine line with the work, and it's a series of conversations. Even the piece that we are sitting on now, it's also in a series of conversations. The inspiration didn't start from any, it's about observation. Like it started from charpai, the Indian, thinai bed. So it started from there, and then we wanted to have this object that's sort of personal but public at the same time, where it's private but it's also like where you have friends. So a bed is like the typology is it's private, like it's a personal space. But if you have seen like any time the charpa is used, it's always like there's more people gathering on it and more people sitting on it. So it starts from there, and then different ways of addition, and how can we reimagine it. And it's not like in one-to-one abstraction of things, but rather like take that. So that's where the observation skills are also very different from different domains, different backgrounds. Like the way you look at the world is so different. Even for me, that was a great thing to understand. Like this is how you look at things. So the way Justine looks at things is so different, and the way certain things that she obsesses over is like is like not very relevant at the first instance. And I'm sure it's the same the other way around.
But it's relevant down the line.
It's relevant down the line.
But I think that's what also makes your work look different, is you can see that well, you have an architecture background, right, in terms of training, and you have a more artistic background in terms of training, even though you went and studied at an architecture school, right, in England. So there is that blend is there even in this installation. You can see it's very structural. You can also see that it's taking something that we have had for a long time and then put your own spin on it, which is unique because both of you have that unique combination of views, right? So when you have this kind of a partnership, you have this kind of an approach which is different to what most people would do. What's it like working with clients?
So I think just to go back for a minute to what you were saying, like what is it, art, architecture, design, performance?
Yeah.
I actually think it's all of that, and we kind of resist the idea of fitting into a given type or box or practice, and yes, it's a spectrum between art and design, and obviously architecture falls closer to design, but I think that practice element is common all across that spectrum. But one thing that I hold dearly, and I think we always try to do in our studio as well, is a professor of mine when I was studying in the UK at the AA, but mind you, it was a very different kind of program in spatial performance and design. So really combining what we both do. But they said to me, and it always stuck with me, always work outside of your comfort zone. And I think that's something that we like to do. That's when you're outside of your comfort zone and you're actually like sort of a little uneasy, little wary. That's when I believe that you actually create more exciting work.
Yeah.
Rather than just sort of churning out what you know.
I think that's why we can relate, because this podcast was outside my comfort zone until I started doing it. So that sort of brings it back to that.
Yeah.
But that's, when we talked at the pre-interview, you were talking about you have two approaches to design. One is the physical approach and one is the philosophical approach. What did you mean by that, Deepak? I think you mentioned those words at that time, so I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, philosophical approach, I don't mean it in a very abstract way, but rather like what is the goal that we want to achieve together as a client or an organization or as a foundation, whoever we work with, what is the goal that we want to achieve, other than the primary given goal. Let's say, like for CPB, the primary given goal is like, yes, we want to show works in a very interesting way that everybody gets to enjoy at in a very reasonable cost and things like that. But how do we go beyond that? Like, how do we democratize it in such a way that all 8 artists participating in one of those galleries get equal representation? They're all part of one ecosystem, one exhibition, but at the same time, the design is done in such a way that we've opened up 3 sites for one artist. So when you walk in, you see the photograph and you're immersed in their work. It's not a parallel relationship where you have the wall and you're as an observer outside it, but rather like you're inside. When you go into the works, you're inside their world. At the same time, you're not disconnected from the rest of the artworks, so you kind of like walk out and you're always, those arches are strategically located at the intersection, so it kind of like, it's like working with the perception where the consciously that the space kind of flows and continues, but you don't get the anxiety that, oh, is this it? Should I have to go out of the door, see the next one? Or rather, like, you keep the flow between 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's one example of like trying to understand what is the higher goal that we want to achieve together,
Yeah.
rather than the primary given goal. Yes, it has to be addressed, it has to be given, but at the same time, how can we go beyond that and bring something more to the table?
So when you said that it was the philosophical approach was not very abstract, it is quite abstract in a lot of
Meaning,
ways.
I'm not gonna. What I meant was like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna quote like Kant or
Descartes.
Descartes or Deleuze.
You can quote yourself. So this is a very different approach. I'm wary of using the word different too much today, so I won't do that. But where did this kind of thinking come from? Was it something that came in later on? Was it at an early age? Did someone set you along a certain path? And this is to both of you. We'll start with you, Deepak, and then.
There's no marked time like they put an electrode in my head and suddenly everything changed.
Yeah.
But rather, like, I think it's a constant process, and during my education in Stadel, where I was mentored by Johan Betten, who was my professor.
Right.
But we had a very different relationship. Like, he would come in at like 10:30 in the night, and we would have a chat for like 3 hours.
Yeah.
Because he just lived next door, so he would just go there.
Yeah.
So it kind of like gave me the time, or he gave me the time, but also it gave myself the time to look beyond the givens, to like understand a little bit more of the aspect of something called referencing. No matter what, we all try to be unique and individual. There's always this thing called referencing. So instead of using referencing as a very direct one-to-one, but use that as a method itself, like where you take something and you understand it, and instead of understanding the extrinsic properties of like A, B, you understand the intrinsic properties of like how does it work, like what does it do, and take that and interpret that into the works.
Yeah.
And this kind of like playing with perception basically started there.
Okay.
So my thesis was on aperspectival space, where I did a lot of like study and research on like how do you move. Like, I was always obsessed with movement in architecture, and there's a long history of that, like movement in architecture, like promenades and this and that.
Yeah.
So I was always interested in that, but also like what would be at the intersection of biology to some sense, because both my parents are doctors, and my dad's no more. What else? Both parents. That's about them.
But being doctors, how did they take your essentially a shift in career from what they do? What about before your parents? What did your grandparents do?
My grandparents were into farming, and they were basically my grandfather from my dad's side used to work in the police.
Okay.
And then my grandfather from my mom's side were they're into farming.
So no one related to art, architecture, but did any of them display creative artistic tendencies?
Display, that's that's subjective, I would say. Yeah. No, they're mostly like more into, I don't know, like more, most of the family, uncle and all of these people are like into business and commerce and
Right.
things like that. Yeah.
And what about you, Justine?
I have a family background of intellectual property law for the last 5 generations.
5 generations.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
it's like the combination like doctors, lawyers.
yeah, pretty much. So yeah, that's what they do. Although my dad, I know definitely always was probably in the back of his mind wanted to be an architect, to the point that when my parents built their house, like, I don't know, 20 years ago, my dad thought he was an architect and bought an architect's table and started drafting what he envisioned his house to be. But it was wonderful because years later my mom actually gifted that table to Deepak. She refurbished it and gave it to him. So there was
yes,
and you have that today in your studio?
At home, our home studio. Yes.
So yeah, I think there was something lurking in the genes, but in relation to design. And of course, being a patent attorney, what you're doing when you're drafting patents is you're looking at ideas, right?
Yeah.
So there is a kind of element of engagement with design on a regular basis. It's a different perspective, but you're constantly looking at new ideas. And you're drafting. It's just a different kind of drafting.
So for I know your family has been in India for many generations, right? So what was that? How well do you feel like people over the generation has integrated? Because it's very clear to me that the way you engage with the way things are done in India is exactly the same as anyone else here, and that is not going to be apparent to somebody who meets you for the first time, right? So suppose you have, there are probably 3 or 4 groups of people that you'd be dealing with work on a daily basis, right? One would be your own team, and then there would be contractors or suppliers or collaborators, and then there would be clients, right? Does their approach to the way they deal with you, is it different than how they would deal with Deepak?
I guess it depends on which group of people you're talking about.
Yeah.
As far as like contractors and people that we work with regularly, they all know me by now.
Yeah.
And they know my version of Tamil, people, right? And they understand my Tamil.
Yeah.
And
your Tamil sounds pretty
solid.
Yeah, it sounds solid.
Yeah.
And there was a period maybe about 10 years ago where I felt the need to sort of justify and position myself constantly and sort of prove my Indianness.
Right.
But I've come to terms with having been brought up in a cross-cultural environment.
Yeah.
And I think actually it's a privilege in a way. It's something to something to celebrate because there aren't many people that have had a similar inside-outside experience of life.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are
because
times
you spent a lot of time growing up in England, right?
No, I went to boarding school there.
Yeah.
But I've always grown up here. I've always lived here.
Yeah.
My family have always been here. And as a child, my parents never sent me to an international school or anything like that. They sent me to a local English-speaking school here in Chennai. So I think those things really helped because I was integrated from a very young age with friends and community that I still hold dear to me.
Yeah, and because you said that you've family's been here for generations, so the upbringing is as Indian as anyone else. There's no difference. So I'll tell you why I'm asking you this question. Because the first time we spoke, I didn't know you at all, right? I had only met you, Deepak, and we spoke. You put me on speaker and on speakerphone, and then we talked. And I didn't know your background at all because I don't get out of the house, so I don't meet too many people. And while now I seem to know a lot of people who know you.
It's a small city, Madras.
Yeah, but in that small city, I don't know too many people, right? So we hadn't met at all. And when I spoke to you on the phone, that didn't come through. I didn't know that there were, first of all, I didn't know your background in theatre or in performance until much later on. I didn't know your family's background as well. And it's very interesting for me to hear it because there are influences from everywhere that come in, right? So everyone is influenced by their past. So it wasn't apparent to me until we met, and then I realized that, okay, so there is a lot of background that has made this work. Did that ever become apparent to you? Not really. It's never been an issue.
We are a product of our journey, right?
So how did you guys actually meet? Where did you meet?
We met in Chennai, and it was 2017. So we met in Chennai, and we started working together in 2018,
right?
Early 2018.
Actually, no, even end of 2017 when we did.
That was 2018.
Okay.
Early 2008, January, February 2018.
Right.
And then we got married in 2020.
Okay, so you say you met in Chennai,
Yes,
but
we met
that
in Chennai.
sounds like an oversimplification, because I know from speaking with you earlier that I'm going to read this list out because I will never remember it off the top of my head. So you grew up here, right?
I grew up here.
You grew up here, and then to make it just one sentence, you went from Germany to the Netherlands to Qatar to Shanghai, and then
I came
back
back
here.
yeah.
So you've had like crazy amount of experience all over the world, and you were working in all these places, or were you studying?
Where I was working.
You studied in Germany.
I studied and worked in Germany.
Right.
And then I was invited to work for UN Studio in Amsterdam.
Right.
And then I used to work for the same office in Shanghai. And then I also worked for another office in Qatar. So, yeah.
So, and that's when you came back here, and then you guys met.
Yeah, I was.
And did you start working together straight away, or
no? I was on my way to somewhere else.
Okay.
So Chennai was a pit stop on my way.
right?
Because my dad's no more. My mom lives here.
Okay.
And my sister lives outside, so I had to like put the house in order.
Right.
So I was here for a short period, and then that's when we met, and then I stayed back, and then Justine went to do her spatial performance design
Yeah.
at the AA, and then we started working together 2018, 2019.
So how did you decide to work together?
Yeah, the first one we did was like a fun project.
Yeah.
So
We came across a really like interesting competition, and
yeah, it was a fun project. So we kind of like it was called the public bet project. So we did like a and yeah, somewhere in middle. It's not purely like design architecture project. It's not purely theater performance project. It was something in between. So that was the first one that we worked, and we had a fantastic collaboration, and we thought, okay, why not we do this more? And then since then we've been like from that on we've been working together.
Right from the beginning, you guys have entered festivals and competitions and biennales. I think you were at the Venice Biennale long ago, right? The architecture.
Submitted.
We submitted. No, we didn't.
Right, but that collaboration started, as you said, 3-4 years ago. So you have a lot of the things that you are known for publicly are at these festivals and biennales. Was that a conscious effort for you to enter these, or were you invited? How does that work?
yeah, I think it's both. There's examples of both. But what attracts us to these kind of events is the temporality aspect. Again, and the public, how one can engage sort of with these unique microcosms of different kinds of communities. Like obviously with the Biennale, it's a much wider audience, but with the festival, it's quite specific, or it can be quite specific, right? Like with something like Magnetic Fields, it has its own microcosm of a creative community, you could say, from across India and abroad. But I think it's the two things that I would say is like the temporality and the public aspect is what draws us to.
Yeah, in some ways, like both of our backgrounds, in the former works that we've done, are also in that zone. Like majority of my career, I've done cultural projects. I've worked on public cultural projects, like what theater. In Shanghai, I was working for a theater project in Hong Kong for 3 years, and also in Amsterdam worked on like mostly public cultural projects. So that's the aspect of thinking in that way has always been there, and also Justine has worked with Susan Lacey and things like that. So the idea of like thinking about the public, it could be the city, it could be a small microcosm, but in general it's always about the publicness is always there. And that kind of I wouldn't say translate, it's a very natural way to think for us.
But that can also translate, it doesn't have to be about a public, it can also translate into designing a house as well, like we are now, but I think what our approach, which might be a little different, is that we think of it like a design script. So we use elements of theatre to come up with how we respond to a given brief, even if it's an intimate, personal, private space like a house.
It's like the character arc. So kind of like build that into the design, and how you start the design kind of like brings all the aspects on the table as we go along.
So along the way, for everybody, there's almost always someone who has helped push them along, right? Especially when that creative professional doesn't have a family background or like friends or something like that in that particular field. So, and you've both mentioned one of your professors each, right? But how important do you feel it is for someone to have a mentor? Is that mentor-mentee relationship, how important do you feel it is to maintain your own creative process as it grows?
Yeah, especially in the design world, to have a mentor is super important, because we don't get taught aspects of business. How do you do certain things? How do you wrap up a contract? How do you, do trademarks? These things are not taught in design schools. Like, how do you run a practice? It's not taught in design schools, where you're fair to everybody. You're not only fair to your clients, but you're also fair to your own team, and you have the ability to tell your clients that this is a certain way, because we are do it ethically. So that's very crucial, because sometimes when we are really involved in your creative process, and in some way, even though it's a discomfort in terms of the zone of creativity, it is a comfort zone in terms of like not going to your accounts and things like that. So that's where at least for us, to have a mentor is like it's super essential to like somebody. And some of our friends, I don't mean mentor not only as like a strictly hierarchical way. We have some friends who's who kind of like tell us like, hey, you guys have to do this, you guys have to put yourself into this or that,
Yeah.
You know, these kind of conversations, like semi-work conversation, it's not like work, but it's also about like, you know, how do you further your agenda?
Yeah.
Quite simply. How can you make things better for everybody? So that kind of conversations is essential. It doesn't have to be, yeah, like I said, it doesn't have to be strictly like one-way road where, you know, somebody tells you what to do and you kind of like say, yes sir, yes ma'am, and execute it, but rather like it puts a question on our head.
Yeah.
Like, oh, like I haven't looked into that aspect of it. Like, what can we do to fix it? So in that way, I think more than having a design mentor,
Yeah.
which
Someone basically to guide you through the entire overall process.
entire process of like how do you sustain a business? How do you sustain a practice? You know,
Right.
like yes, you can have this big hit 1-2 projects and things like that, but if we don't do certain things a certain way, if we don't you know, account for certain things,
Yeah.
you can't sustain a practice. Like you can't sustain your team and, you know, be
Yeah.
fair to them and, you know, compensate them and all of those
And
things.
this reminds me of one of the couple of episodes before you, I had spoken with Neil Schoenfelder, and I was asking him about big breaks that Mancini had, and he said there was no such thing as a big break, and it was just slow, steady growth. And when I shared that episode, someone, a friend of mine, left a comment saying that it's good that he is saying that there weren't any big breaks, because people should not expect that one big break is going to transform their business. It's about that sustained effort to
find joy in your process, that every single day you kind of like,
well, that's what makes it a practice.
yeah,
Right?
makes it a practice. So in that way, I think more than like a design mentor, I think this is very essential. In terms of design, we do have a lot of friends who live in different parts of the world. We share our works constantly. There's a friend of ours who now lives in Netherlands. Like, you know, we collaborate once in a while, and that kind of it's kind of a shock in the system to, like, you know, because he can offer only a certain amount of time, and we also have certain amount of time only to participate in certain things. So we kind of like, you know, push for like
It's a sprint.
It's a sprint. Yeah, we call it a design sprint, and you kind of like push. So that's like, it's not direct mentoring, but it's kind of like sort of a peer learning way. And both of us, I think personally, are that character where even with our team, it's always about like, what do you think? What do you, you know, how, what is your opinion on this? Like, what is, so I think that makes a healthy habit for long-term creative, you know, how do you sustain yourself? Like all the juice runs out very fast. So how do you sustain yourself? You sustain yourself by, you know, constantly engaging with different people, different professions, different mediums, of different thought processes and things like that.
And also to have like a kind of duality between like the commitment to it, like kind of being an introvert and looking within in your practice, but also keeping, you know, one leg out where you've got a tab on what's happening and researching, not sort of just like scrolling through, you know, endless like we're inundated with today, but digging a little bit deeper and looking at like, where's research going in terms of design, and what are the, you know, what's happening with the art world globally, like where's things going, even with regards to cultural production. in general, I think, like how is the way we live and the way we work changing post-pandemic. Like these are all very overarching themes that have like many, many narratives and, research points within them, I think.
Right.
And so we try to push our team also to go out there and find.
So Deepak, you mentioned something that I think now both of you are speaking along similar lines, right? And you also said that both of you are in sync with each other when it comes to certain things. Exactly what I was getting at. When it comes to certain things, you're both in line. But so in the lead up to my next question, do you look at the architecture story as a business, or is it a creative entity?
For a creative entity to live, you need to have the business.
Right. So
I'm going to give you this Simon Sinek's example. Like,
sorry?
Simon Sinek is, you'll know for sure.
Yeah.
Somehow you would have heard him talk.
Okay.
Yeah. So he brought up this interesting thing, like where he says, like, the money is the gas. You need money, but that's not your destination, right? Like, you can't go to your destination without gas. Like, you need gas, for sure. But that's the focus, like where it has to sustain as a business,
right?
For sure, because no free labor, it has to sustain as a business.
So I'll tell you why I asked you that question, because if you're in line with each other for a lot of things, is there one of you who takes the lead when it comes to purely the business development side of it, or are both of you in sync with each other for that as well?
I think we have different things, yeah.
With VD also, like, I would say there are different tasks involved, right? Like, business development is not just one task, there are different tasks involved. So naturally I'm more on the introvert side and Justine's more on the extrovert side. So that kind of helps in different task distribution because it's natural.
Yeah.
I don't have to say like, oh, but I want to do that, you do this. Like, I'm happy to do this. Please, you do that.
So you have complementary skill sets in some ways.
I would say it's more than skill set, it's basically personality types. So, I've come to terms with the fact that, the world is the way it is. So.
Right.
Yeah.
You have anything to add, Justine?
I think you've summed it up pretty well. Yeah, and it's always a give and take, right? Like it's not like, oh, this is your job description and nothing outside of that.
Yeah.
I think that's why that's a partnership. That's it's a constant like finding a balance. Like sometimes one person might do more and another person might be busy with something else, and then it tips the other way. And so, as long as there's a mutual respect for the other person and also for everyone in the team, then you can successfully, I think, work well together.
Yeah.
So.
But it's also challenges involved, and instead of
so for your unique practice, sorry to interrupt you, but for a unique practice like what you guys have, what are the challenges? Because I suspect it won't be the same as an architecture practice. Purely only an architecture or an interior design practice would have one set of challenges, but I suspect yours would have a different set, right? So what are those day-to-day challenges that you guys face?
It's not, so we kind of do, we're not that far out from a regular architecture practice. As much as everybody say, as much as I would like to claim that we are so unique, We're not. We're part of the same breed.
Yeah.
And maybe it comes across slightly different because our interest in the way we kind of put a lot of emphasis on process.
And I think a lot of your output looks very different than.
Yeah. But
for instance, this installation would not, you would not find too many architecture portfolios having something like this as a finished product. A lot of concepts maybe.
Yeah.
But that's why I feel that, because I think even the clients that you guys would be working with, the general audience who may respond to the kind of work that you guys put out is different. No?
I don't know. I mean, I think yeah.
So there's
or am I the only one looking at you guys differently?
There's the public side and there's the private side. We also, I'm happy to admit, like we also do a lot of chore jobs, sort of renovation work, sort of, you know, we go out of our way to do what the client feels comfortable and definitely bring a new dimension to what could be imagined or what was thought as a possibility, bring a new dimension for sure.
Right.
But not completely override anybody's wishes to say like, you know, this is what we're going to put an installation in your like office renovation project.
Right.
No, we don't do that. But rather like if you would propose like, you know, there's a changing medium, like you don't need this many conference rooms. You could work on an acoustic pod, or, you know, it could be something that's in between a furniture and a space, but it's meant for a specific, you know, purpose. And that kind of translation work, or rather like, you know, spending the time to say like, how do I communicate this, is something that we do. But also we do a lot of like, you know, regular architectural work.
Right.
And
so you're, the good thing is you have answered the next thing that I wanted to ask you about, which was what kind of work, what's the various kinds of work that you do. So it's nice to
so
see that.
Right now we're working on like residential projects, and we also like we've done one installation, like 2-3 this year, and we're working on a couple of residences. We're working on an office project, and
Heritage.
there's a restoration project that we're working on. So there's kind of an interesting mix of like bringing in the new and the old.
Right.
And even when we do completely new works, we try to bring in elements of the old and the other way around. But in all honesty, we're barely 3-4 years old.
Yeah.
And in the middle, there's the COVID situation.
Right.
So we were forced to think on our feet, because we focused purely on, you know, installation art and public art and design, festivals, that kind of work. And then when the COVID hit and, you know, things started to go in the other direction, where the word social was to be distanced. So we have to radically rethink how do we go about our practice. And we're in a way so happy that it came so early on, to not take anything as a given, to have the flexibility to readapt to any given situation. It could be financial. A lot of big offices had problems with the 2008, like you were saying. You had issues with 2008.
Again, for me, the 2008 thing happened 3 years after I started my business. And COVID also seems to have happened 3 years after you guys started yours as well.
Yeah. So it has to be, it kind of like taught us to like readapt, you know, like we have to rethink things you have to do it on your feet, like you have to be fast enough to do the turnaround, and also finding methods and processes where we can work collaboratively, because a big part of our work is to have a core team.
Right.
So when all of this happened, we actually spent a lot of time on building the team rather than chasing projects.
Right.
Because projects will come and go, team doesn't.
So when you say chasing projects, how do you guys get the more eye-catching projects? Let's just put it that way, because not every house or office that you design is going to get that kind of attention. That's to satisfy a client's requirements and to satisfy your own get your own satisfaction as well from that kind of a project. But it's these festivals that really are. So if someone was to Google either of your names or was to Google the architecture story, those are the projects that get the attention, right? So how do you get them? How do
you chase them?
Yeah.
Exactly. So what's the process behind that? Because I'm sure most people won't know. I don't know.
You look up like what's the
take Burning Man for example. They have something called a global arts grant.
Right.
And thousands of people from all over the world apply. If your design is something that they like, you know, then you'll be able to get funding for it.
So almost all these festivals, there's a proper application process to get in?
Proper application,
or if
both
there's
ways,
not,
yeah.
then you find that, you know, how to, sometimes we go to a festival for the first time and we think like, wow, it's a great, you know, community, and then we try to figure out, you can't just like show up and say, I want to do something, but you have to go a second year. And then maybe the second or the third year, you find out like who's working on it, who's making stuff happen.
Yeah.
And then, you know, rather than going and say, I want my project here, you say you want to contribute and you want to be part of the community. Because
first you
most
go
of
to participate
that do these
and
things do it like to be honest with you, doing festivals, you do it for the love of it.
Yeah.
It's not like you get paid the big bucks to do, you know, an installation for Burning Man or any kind of arts festival, right? I mean, those are the passion projects, I think.
Yeah,
mostly.
and also even with regular architecture projects, yes, there are in general, if you would have spoke, I mean, when you ask any established firm architect, they would say like, you know, it's not like they wouldn't chase for the eye-catchy projects.
Yeah.
You
It
just
happens.
do what you do, and sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And you still have to have the energy to do the same the next day and over.
Yeah.
Basically, to have the discipline.
So I remember at a workshop, someone was asking me, and this workshop was after I had spent many years working. One of the students asked me, how do you get these projects? And I was like, how do you get these projects once I start working? It was still a college student. So I said, you won't get a lot of the really good projects when you just start working, unless you're very lucky, right? So the projects that I was shooting when I started off, I was billing by the hour, not because I wanted to bill high rates per hour. It's just that clients were not willing to pay for more than 2 hours of work. So I'd get small projects and I'd get small budgets to go along with them. And it was only after that once I built a portfolio, I could say things like, I'll do it, but I have a minimum charge. And I will not work for less than 1 day's charge. You know, and that all comes later. And then automatically, as you do more work, as you said, the right projects happen to come your way, and it's your job to catch them, to make that opportunity count. But also getting these.
Also, apart from that, like there's also something like figuring out your interests, right? Like,
Right.
just when I said like you chase them, doesn't mean chase them, you know, mindlessly, but rather like really focus on like what's your interest. And so even when you do BD, it's a creative process. Like you kind of like try to bring the dots together. I mean, we're still in the learning process
Yeah.
of all of this, but I'm just sharing what I've experienced so far.
Yeah.
It's like even that you kind of like when you join the dots, it's kind of a process that you go through.
Yeah.
So instead of first thing is to figuring out what speaks to you, where's your heart, and that makes the rest of the process very bearable.
Yeah. You asked me something at the start of the conversation, which was about digital photography and things like that. And that's it did. So when I started my business in 2005, I'd already been shooting on my own and learning from my learning photography from my dad and my granddad for many years before that. So I learnt on film, and in college there was the transition to digital, right? So I think for my the visual communication department at my college, mine was the first project that had digital photographs in it, because I really had to push hard to make that change, because I had just been given a 1.3 megapixel camera. So I had a fully manual SLR, film SLR, and I had a 1.3 megapixel digital camera. So I wanted to use that, right? So, and that really was a big change, because there's no expense of printing and processing, and also there's the immediacy of knowing whether your shot worked or
You
not.
learned completely in analog.
I learned completely on film, and I learned on fully manual cameras, so where there was no autofocus, no auto exposure of any kind. And there were times where I would forget to change the battery on the SLR, and if you've used a film SLR, you know, if you don't change the battery, because it's mechanical, you can still take pictures, but you don't get any exposure readings. So you need to know what you're doing with exposure. So in fact, see, this is one of those things that I forget about until now. So when I did that, when I had that change from film to digital, it was like a seismic shift. And I remember in 2006, 2007, there were a lot of older photographers who didn't adapt to transitioning from film to digital very quickly. And because I came in on that cusp, I knew how to edit a photo digitally at whatever rudimentary level back then, but I knew how to do it myself. So I knew how to shoot based on how I would edit. Transitioning from thinking of arts as a completely analog, tactile thing to being something technologically driven. Did you guys experience any sort of a shift?
Not that much of a violent shift, but rather like using rudimentary digital tools to using more advanced digital tools. Also because of the exposure of working with Yin Studio, which is, if not one of the top 10 in the world, but at least in Europe, it's one of the top 10 studios in the world, which, you know, constantly evolving, adapting digital technologies and things like that.
Right.
So having had that exposure, it's part of the process of what we do. So, but we don't really like focus on the technology as the you know, we're not the as the end game, but rather like definitely using that for turnaround times. You know, where you invest, how do you invest your time? Like in a design process, when you're working with a client, there's a set, you know, start end point in terms of like, you know, get the design discussions going and things like that.
Yeah.
So it really helps us to rebalance the time, where there's a lot of repetitive work could be automatized, and so it gives you more time to focus on things that you love, that you care about.
Creativity, essentially.
yeah.
Not that like technology isn't creative or
Right.
you know. Like
But it
using
involves a different type of creativity to, automatize and,
And when did you start experiencing more, using more technology for your work? Around when?
I think actually right from the get-go, or at least
right from the get-go, yeah.
Yeah, when we started to build a team, we realized like, okay, now's an opportunity to.
But this goes even
To
before
position
your time at
ourselves.
Architecture Story, right? So, from when did you guys start working professionally, even if it was for someone else?
Like 2000.
18.
You mean under the architecture story?
No, I
or
mean
just,
any sort of
2007.
2007. Both of you?
Seven,
No, for
8.
me, 10.
Okay. So around that time was still very much a transition period. Was there much pushback faced for adopting more tech, or was there still an insistence that you need to stay
I'm
analog?
all for, I'm extremely pro-tech, but I'm also focused on what is your intended goal? What's your agenda of using it? To use it just for the sake of using it is not what we stand for. But if it enhances you to visualize your work, if it enhances you to like problem solve better, if it enhances you to like, do other things, then it's a great tool. But we still believe in like old school research and old school physical model. You've seen the studio,
Yeah.
there's the old school physical model. We also experiment in like different materials in physical model and with clay
Different forms
and
of
different-
illustration.
different forms of illustration.
Because you can't replace a lot of them, right? You can't replace, when you're talking about different kinds of material, most material, it's not purely visual, it's also tactile. You need to be able to feel it and get the idea of the texture.
So there used to be a time where I could, we could just look at an image and you can say in which software this project is conceived. So when it comes to that, then you want to go. I think we consider ourselves a little bit lucky because we harped on it at the right time.
Right,
It wasn't
yeah.
like we weren't like too early adopters that that becomes the driving factor. But
It shouldn't be a gimmick, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the thing that one needs to, I think, navigate through. It's like you shouldn't like use the technology because you can learn it because you're
Yeah,
excited.
so you were
by it.
asking like where we differ, right? So this is
Yeah.
this is a point where we differ. I don't think anyone uses it as a gimmick because I think different people use it for different agenda.
Yeah.
The different thing that excites them, different thing. There are people who are very excited about codes and they want to do it, and fair enough. It's what and the clients are okay with that, and they go for it. So I think it's more like where the focus is. So for us, that's not the focus, but we do rely heavily on it in terms of production, turnaround time,
Yeah.
how you can do something better, faster, easier.
Making your work more efficient.
Making our work efficient, and we're like loose and tight in the same in one way.
Yeah.
Loose in terms of like how can you bring different referencing into your work and how can you rethink these things.
Yeah.
But also tight in terms of processes, like every single day constantly thinking about how could you make something better, how could you make your own internal process better, and
Yeah.
that goes down to the level of like how do you save a file.
Right. Yeah. I totally agree. So that okay. So I know I'm going to make this up. I'm going to shift away from you for a second. But so have you used Adobe Lightroom?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Lightroom has its own internal cataloging system, right? Somehow I've never been able to use it. I use Lightroom purely for editing, but because when you're talking about how you save a file, I'm referring to the workflow. So how do you make it efficient in a way that you know where every file is? Is that what you're referring to, or are you referring to something else?
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because once you
can
have
ask
your
me
own
anything
system,
in 5 years ago, 3 years ago,
yeah,
it won't take me more than 60 seconds to get you the information.
right. Because once you have a system that works, it's important to maintain that system forever, essentially.
Yeah, so this was a big lesson because when I was working on the project in Hong Kong, so we had 12 consultants around the world, and we're liaising with the Hong Kong office. We were in Shanghai and the Amsterdam office.
Right.
So, and different time zones, different servers, different, so you can't, you're not in the same place.
Yeah.
So you have to find that language to communicate.
Yeah.
And to have the templates in place to, so that's where scalability comes. So the ease of doing something as simple as this to doing something where you can like really scale up is built into the system, where you can, you can operate in different ways because your base structure has the capacity to flex.
Justine, when you said about using tech as a gimmick, I agree with you in one way, because you look at most students, right? You're experimenting a lot, right? When you're just learning, when you're broadening your knowledge base, when you're thinking, how am I going to use all these tools that I have? You use the tools in any way you can, and the minute you find a really cool function, you'll use it even if you don't need it.
Which I think is great in a learning environment.
Which is great when you're learning.
You kind of have that judgment of like, oh, is this a gimmick or not? So you
Yeah.
need to like get your hands dirty.
I
with
agree.
it. But I think again, it comes from like different backgrounds. Maybe like if I see a theatre performance where there's an excessive amount of projections and somehow the narrative isn't really, or even if it's non-narrative, like it isn't kind of in relation to, one isn't kind of jiving with and it just feels like they're just props to detract from a lack of a story or so a lack of something else, then I automatically go back into like, oh, but if that all wasn't here, will I still feel I want to watch this?
But I think that understanding also comes later.
They have innovated in
but I think
way
that
of doing
understanding of
projections.
Yeah, absolutely. But then,
That's where their heart was.
But I think that if the body,
No, but like you said, that understanding and that self-awareness of, am I doing something that actually needs to be done to tell that story or to send that message? That comes late. That comes a bit later, right? Once you have some experience, very few 20-year-olds would have that kind of.
But
understanding,
how would they? They have to go through that. They have to
go through that.
They have to be excited about.
So there was one thing that I sort of picked up when. So if you remember, I was talking about my exhibition, right? Those photos, no client would buy them. No architect would buy it and put it in their offices. Now I was experimenting a lot, and my work really it was not polished, right? But luckily the one thing that I knew when I was starting off is I experiment on my own time. I don't experiment on client work. So I experiment on my own, and whatever I gain from those experiments, then I practice it and then put it out for the clients. Because the client cannot be paying for me to learn and try something out crazy when it doesn't work for them. Does that ring true for your line of work as well, or?
Definitely, for sure. Like, you're paid for certain expertise, and that's your core. But it doesn't hurt for you to, push boundaries.
Right.
Like, okay, let's say you're using a certain type of camera, so it's it's okay if you know, I mean, you're constantly doing it now. You've gone into 360, you know, motion capture and things like that. No, what is that? 360 video?
Yeah, a lot of new things that I'm trying out.
Yeah,
but it's
so
like you try stuff out. So it's more like controlled experimentation when it's with a client, right? So you don't.
Yes, that's the word. Controlled experimentation.
It's not complete. You're not completely unleashed. So you do all the kooky stuff on your own.
What I mean by, you know, adapting to tech and things like that is not only your end product but also your internal processes. How do you communicate with your team member? How do you organize your tasks for the day? How do you organize your tasks for the week? How do you, you know, like, how do you regulate the time that you spend on each project? And all of this, we're at a time that we can, you know, and these are like, you can do it in paper, you can do it on Excel, or you can do it on another platform. Yes, it does demand you to be a little bit more flexible and learn new things and, you know, be adaptable. But it does pay off. When, you know, when you have to deliver, you spend a lot of time on doing what your clients truly pay you for, which is design. They're not paying you for organizing your team or communicating or doing your task list or that.
You need to have that down.
Yeah. So if tech helps us to, you know, make that better, faster, easier. Well, on the other hand, the clients are paying us for design. So we spend more time on that.
And also, I think to get to know technology, if you're going to use a certain technology, especially with like design tools, that you can actually play with it, right? Like you have to figure it out or figure out some portion of it to a point where you can actually play with it. Like going back to projections, if it's projection mapping, you don't necessarily have to be an expert in projection mapping, but you need to know enough to play. Because I think that's something that we always try to like stay true to or to bring into our work is like, I guess you can see with this structure, an element of playfulness into design. And that doesn't also necessarily transform always in such a clear way, manifest like this. It could even be within an office space, right? Like how do you bring about certain social dynamics that create a better working environment through, you know, elements of play.
I'm going to switch tracks completely now. Going away from your actual work or your approach to work, but how much of an importance has luck played in each of your journeys to where you are today?
Define luck. Like, what do you mean? Like something that you don't really do and something that comes and sits on your plate, or?
Well, okay. Let me give you an example about from my own past. Right, I was extremely lucky to be born into a family of creative people. So whether it was my granddad or my dad or my mom, there was some gene running around there that and also an environment that allowed me to do what I wanted to do. I never had any pushback. I never had any doubt about what I wanted to do. Perhaps if I had wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, it would have been a deviation, right? So that would have been a real deviation for me. So for me, that was very lucky. Yeah. And the fact that I did not enjoy school at all, I was still not pushed to perform the way Vidya Mandir has a reputation of having students perform.
Yeah.
So, so for me, that was definitely a piece of luck, and the fact that I had all these people who have run creative businesses, they could, I could see what that business was like from a very young age. So I knew what to expect. Yeah. I knew to expect, it being a slow start. I knew to expect that, even though I expected to push past that faster, which of course didn't happen. Things take time, I realized only later on. But it was still a fortunate circumstance that I didn't need to worry about my basics, right? When it comes to financially, I didn't need to worry about a lot. So I count myself very lucky on a lot of fronts, and that allowed me like to have 2 steps up, and I could push off from there. But for me, it was also a lot of circumstance and also the right environment. So would that be something? So that's what I meant by asking you about how much did luck play a part for each of you. I'm not talking about as both of you together.
Yeah. You want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think similar to what you say, I feel blessed to have had a good education and always been able to study what I want to study. But I think it's hard work no matter what, right? And in a way, I'm very happy about the way that the internet has democratized opportunities for people who might not have had the same education as you or I.
Sure.
And I think that although there is this like massive content and it's kind of overwhelming a lot of the time, what it's done is give opportunities, which in turn makes it harder for anyone to actually gain momentum, because there's just so much out there.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to carve rather than just going to it's not enough today to just go to the right school, go to the right college, and do the right internships. Like that's just not enough. Whereas I think at some point it was about that. Today it's not. And
now it's also how you differentiate yourself.
Yeah, and constantly.
Constantly, yeah.
So.
If you're talking about that kind of genetic luck, I'm on the other spectrum of that.
Right.
But I think I was super lucky to meet the right people at the right through my journey. Like one of the seniors that I worked with while I was in Bangalore. While I was working in Bangalore, who's still a good friend of mine. I was very lucky to meet him, and with the professor that I've worked and the people that some of my friends, and most of the learning has always been some kind of peer learning system, and that's and also like it's more like luck in the sense of like meeting interesting people.
Yeah.
And that's I find myself lucky in that way.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I'm not waiting to anymore to have that definitive point. Where one day I met this mentor who changed everything. Like it's a collection of many people.
The interesting part of Johan is like he wouldn't speak to you. He doesn't shout and no nonsense like that. But he just would ignore you if you don't do the right. If you don't put in the work, he just doesn't speak to you. As simple as that.
Wow.
He just acts as if like you don't exist in the space. That's all. So it's not like you have to have the attitude and the aptitude to put yourself out there and say like, okay, I don't know this, but I'm willing to move forward, and that also instigates some sort of excitement on the other side.
Yeah.
To say like, okay, cool, let's see what this project of mine can do. So yeah.
I think that's a good place to end this conversation, because we all come from some form of some background or the other, and it's up to us. We may have fortunate circumstances, we may have unfortunate circumstances, but it's how you take those experiences and pull yourself out.
Yeah.
So after such a casual conversation, I feel very awkward saying this because it breaks away, but I'm very thankful you guys agreed to do this podcast and came on. I'd been looking forward to it for a long time. So, and the fact that you were so open and you put in this much of effort to make this happen I'm very happy about that, and I'm really glad. And I think people who watch this will get a totally different take on what they're doing. Because it doesn't matter if you're an architect, you're a photographer, you're a designer, you're an artist, you're any person, this is going to be something useful for them to take away.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for
the
opportunity to go on this.
Well, that's our show for this week. You can watch other full episodes and curated playlists at www.everythingcomestogether.com. Please subscribe to Sreenag Pictures on YouTube and like or leave a comment for this video. You can listen to the audio podcast by subscribing to Everything Comes Together on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and leave a 5-star review. If you like this episode, please tell a friend about it and help get the word out about this show. The Everything Comes Together video and audio series is produced by Sreenag Pictures. Post-production by Thangaraj, production assistance by G.S. Mohan, and the original music by Ashray Harishankar from Escapist Music. Until we meet again with another fascinating guest, you can reach me on Instagram at Sreenag or at everythingcomestogether.com. See you soon.